Welcome to the Scottish Rite Journal podcast, an audio presentation of the Scottish Rite Journal, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. This week's article is Buried Plenty Shallow, the story of Henry M. Wheeler, Frontiersman, Doctor, and Grandmaster Mason, by Brother Gregory S. Curse, 33rd degree, and comes from the September-October 2016 issue of the Scottish Rite Journal. Have you ever heard of Jesse James? Of course you have. On the other hand, have you ever heard of Dr. Henry Wheeler? It is not likely that you have. So, this astounding saga just might prove that the bad guys leave a legacy that is remembered far longer than the good guys. Henry Mason Wheeler was born in Newport, New Hampshire in 1853. When he was 2 years old, the family moved to the town of Northfield in Minnesota Territory, then still a frontier area. We don't know much about young Henry Wheeler's life. His father was originally a stock drover, but at some point became the owner of a drugstore in Northfield. As a young man, Wheeler acquired a love of hunting and a skill and comfort level with firearms that would remain with him throughout his life and figure prominently in this story. Being a good student, Henry took advantage of the fact that a college education was available in his hometown and attended Carleton College, then in its first decade of existence. His next academic stop was at Ann Arbor, Michigan, where in 1875 he was enrolled in the University of Michigan Medical School. His life might have remained ordinary until the events of September 7, 1876 intruded and thrust Henry Wheeler into celebrity status for the rest of his life. On that date, the Jesse James Gang rode into Northfield, Minnesota. The James Gang, based in Missouri, had an astonishing string of successful bank and train robberies dating back to the Civil War. Ordinarily, the James Gang was not challenged because of their fierce reputation with gunplay. This was not to be the case in Northfield, Minnesota. On that date, young Henry Wheeler was relaxing in front of his father's drugstore, enjoying a vacation from medical school. He noticed three strangers ride up to the bank across the street, tie up their horses, and then sit down on some boxes outside the bank. Later, these three were identified as Charlie Pitts, Bob Younger, and one of the James brothers. Two more strangers, Cole Younger and Clell Miller, arrived on horseback. The first three entered the bank, Clell Miller closing the door and Cole Younger remaining in the street. The owner of the hardware store came along, wanting to make a routine bank transaction. When he met with resistance at the door, he was struck down by Clell Miller and thrown into the street. At this point, Hank Wheeler shouted, "Robbery! They are robbing the bank!" Clell Miller fired at him, the bullet going over his head. Hank ducked into a drugstore to find a weapon. Finding none there, he ran out of the back door of the drugstore, down the alley to a hotel. There he found an Army carbine and raced upstairs to a window overlooking the street. By this time, downtown Northfield was a combat zone. The rest of the James Gang had arrived. Several local people had secured weapons, and the two sides were blazing away at each other. Hank Wheeler took aim from the upstairs window and, with his second shot, hit and instantly killed the outlaw Clell Miller. He also shot and wounded Bob Younger, although that outlaw escaped. At the conclusion of the action, which lasted about 7 minutes, two outlaws and two local people were dead. After the gun battle, the net effect was that although Jesse James escaped and lived, the reputation, success, and very existence of this outlaw band had ended. When Henry Wheeler died, 54 years later, he was the last surviving of those who played a major role in the Northfield bank robbery of 1876. While it is sometimes difficult to separate historical fact from legend, one of the legends about Wheeler is that he approached the sheriff after the gun battle was over with an intriguing question. As a medical student, he needed a cadaver for anatomy class. He needed to either provide one or pay for one. But after the Northfield raid, there were fresh bodies all over the street, so Hank sensed an opportunity. He asked the sheriff if he could have one of the outlaws' bodies for his use at medical school. The sheriff winked and nodded and said, "Hank, it would be against the law for me to turn the bodies over to you, but I'll tell you what, I'll see that the outlaws are buried plenty shallow." The legend says that a day or two later, Henry Wheeler shipped a box or a barrel by Railway Express in care of his roommate at the University of Michigan. The container was labeled pickles and smelled heavily of formaldehyde. Henry Wheeler graduated from medical school in 1877. His next studies would be at the College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York City. There he completed what we would call a residency today. During this time, Henry married his first wife in 1878, Miss Adeline Murray of Northfield. In 1880, his medical training finally completed, he returned to his hometown of Northfield to set up practice. His wife Adeline died in 1881 during a difficult childbirth. The infant daughter also died. So it was that Dr. Henry Wheeler left his hometown of Northfield in 1881, possibly to put his wife's untimely death behind him, and moved to the town of Grand Forks in Dakota Territory. A year after arriving to Grand Forks, he was appointed surgeon for the Great Northern Railway. Later he held the same position of railway surgeon for the Northern Pacific Railway. Wheeler was in partnership with various physicians over the years, but from 1896 he was a partner in Wheeler, Campbell, and Williamson, in those days the largest medical practice in the city, which years later evolved into the Valley Medical Clinic. In 1894, he became secretary of the State Medical Examining Board, serving several years in that capacity. He was also a member of the U.S. Pension Board and served as president of the North Dakota State Medical Association. It was said that Dr. Wheeler had a gruff exterior and a rather brusque manner, but in reality these masked a heart of gold. The story goes that Dr. Wheeler was called by a poor widow to attend to her stricken child. The home was clean, but bore the hallmarks of poverty, and malnutrition was evidenced in the faces of the mother and children. As the doctor put on his overcoat, the mother apologized for the fact that she did not have enough money to pay for his visit, but she assured him that she would pay as soon as she could. A smile flickered for a moment round the corners of the doctor's mouth. He held out his hand to say goodbye, assured her that the child would get well, and promised to call again the next day. The other hand dug down into his pocket, and when he left, there was a $10 bill on the table. In 1883, he married his second wife, Miss Josephine Connell of Grand Forks. They built a new home in the Central Park area in 1885, which still stands today bearing the plaque of the National Register of Historic Places. Henry Wheeler was an active citizen in the civic life of his community. Always a sportsman, he appears in 1897 as the president of the Grand Forks Gun Club. The city directory of 1898 states that he was president of the Whist Club at the prestigious Pioneer Club on the top floor of the St. John's Block. He acted as district campaign manager for President William McKinley. In the early years of the 20th century, Wheeler is shown as a vice president of the Commercial Club, the forerunner of the present Chamber of Commerce. His political career started at about the same time, and in 1909 we find Dr. Wheeler seated on the Grand Forks City Council. In 1917, he was elected to the highest office of the city and became, His Honor, Mayor Henry M. Wheeler. He was re-elected once, but when the city changed to the city commission form of government in 1920, he chose to retire from public office and active politics. It is not known what induced Henry Wheeler to become a Freemason. He was made a Master Mason on September 25, 1879 in Social Lodge No. 48 of Northfield, Minnesota. He was 25 years old and received the 3 Blue Lodge degrees within the space of 8 days. When Brother Wheeler made the move to Grand Forks, he demitted from Social Lodge, and on November 11, 1881, was elected to membership in Acacia Lodge No. 15 of the Grand Lodge of North Dakota. Today it is known as Acacia Lodge No. 4. He apparently made an impact as a Mason because only 1 year after his arrival, he is listed as the senior deacon of Acacia Lodge. He served as worshipful master of that lodge for 3 terms, starting in 1883. Not only was Brother Wheeler active in Blue Lodge, he was also a member of the York Rite and Shrine. Outside of the Masonic family, he held membership in the Oddfellows, the Knights of Pythias, and the Elks. In 1884, Worshipful Brother Wheeler represented his lodge at the Dakota Territory Grand Lodge session in Aberdeen. Again, he must have made an immediate impression because he was elected Grand Junior Warden at this session, when he had been a Master Mason for a little less than 5 years. He was twice elected Deputy Grandmaster in 1885 and 1886. Then in 1887, at the ripe old age of 33, he became Most Worshipful Henry M. Wheeler, Grand Master of Masons in Dakota Territory. The Grand Lodge session over which Most Worshipful Brother Wheeler presided was that of 1888 and was held in Deadwood. There were 100 constituent lodges, of which 8 were still under dispensation. The membership of the Grand Lodge stood at 4,051 Master Masons, with a net increase of 512 during the year. In his prepared remarks, Grandmaster Wheeler commented on the Grand Lodge treasury balance of $5,164.40, stating, "This will be amply sufficient to discharge all the accrued indebtedness and leave a neat balance in the hands of the Grand Treasurer." On April 13, 1930, his trestle board was complete, and after only a couple of days of feeling ill, he died of heart complications. His services were held and his body lay in state with a Knight Templar honor guard. Many of the Masonic Brotherhood sat together for the service. Also many non-Masons attended. The entire medical community of Grand Forks sat together as a body with many physicians from out of town. The flags in Grand Forks flew at half-mast that day. Immediately after the service, his casket was placed on a train and Henry Wheeler commenced the final journey to his hometown of Northfield, Minnesota. On the next day, he was buried in Oak Lawn Cemetery with Masonic honors by Social Lodge No. 48, which had given him his first introduction to Masonry over 50 years earlier. There he rests today with his parents, a brother, a sister, his wives, and one of the little ones that died in infancy. Like and share this article, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you wish to comment, please leave one, and as a reminder, hit the notifications bell. Any accompanying photographs or citations for this article can be found in the corresponding print edition. The Scottish Rite Journal is published by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. Mark Dreisenstock, 33rd degree Managing Editor. I'm your host, Matt Bowers.